Thank you to the choir for that lovely offertory. I want to talk this morning about promises. There's an old saying, I'm not sure how it goes, a promise made is a promise kept, maybe. Perhaps often a promise made is a promise broken. Maybe a promise made is a promise renegotiated over time. So we as Unitarian Universalists know a few things about the process of promises or covenants, as we call them in the UU and in other religious traditions. In my own life, this has played out in lots of different ways. So last August, Stephanie and I had a beautiful vow renewal service on the beach in Hawaii to celebrate our 10th wedding anniversary, and it was incredible. It was more beautiful and meaningful than I could ever have imagined. To be honest, early in our marriage, when Stephanie first talked about wanting to renew our vows at 10 years, I wasn't on board. In fact, I was a little offended. I had stood with her when we got married, not once, but twice, because we were a same-sex couple in Missouri, getting married in a state that didn't legally recognize our marriage. So twice I stood gazing into the eyes of the love of my life, offering my vows and intending to keep them for as long as we lived. And so when my wife wanted to renew our vows after 10 years, I just kept asking why. What was the point? Nothing had changed for me since I made those promises, and nothing was going to change. But Stephanie felt differently. And it was important to her, so fortunately, I'm not a complete jerk, and just the fact that it was important to her was enough to cause me to reevaluate my stance. And I'm so glad I did. See, what I didn't realize when we first started talking about a vow renewal was how different our context was 10 years in from the one in which we first made our vows. As I wrote vows for this next season of our lives, where we were both in a different place personally, professionally, and as parents, I realized that much had changed. None of those changes undid our original covenant, but they did require more nuanced thought and wording to express now in this new context. We went into our marriage relationship, as I'm sure many do, with some unrealistic expectations, with some intentions that we might not be able to keep up, and certainly with a lot of blind spots about what life was really going to be like. For instance, we got married after my first year of seminary, and we both imagined that when I left there, I would be called to an existing church, paid a reasonable salary, and perhaps even work somewhat reasonable hours. In reality, what happened was we planted a new church, which in many ways is a whole lot more work than going to serve an existing church. It was a place where the people were unable to pay a minister, and so the idea of working reasonable hours was immediately out the window, as I consistently worked 2 and 3 other jobs to pay the bills, while also serving a fledgling faith community as its sole pastor. Stephanie may have signed up to be a minister's wife, but I'm pretty sure she didn't sign up to be that kind of minister's wife. So over those first several years, trying to figure out how to navigate this new way of being in the world, I would say that some of our initial intentions and promises were challenged. On top of that, I don't think anyone has any idea of the stress and tension that will be a part of your daily lives when raising children, whether they are biological children of both parents or one is a step parent. In our case, I guess because we thought we really had it together in our relationship, and I had this vision for the education of our children, but no longer the time to carry it out, we thought it would be a good idea for Stephanie to jump right in with homeschooling our kids, these complex little humans that she had known for all of 18 months at that point. Lots of you learned something about homeschooling that you didn't know before last spring. There are lots of tears, lots of doubts, a lot of anguish involved in teaching one's children at home. As many of you know, it's not for the faint of heart, but it can also be incredibly rewarding. I am so thankful for her willingness to step into that role and to give herself in that way. And also, we couldn't have known the stress and the pressure that would go along with it, the ridiculous fights that we would have. But 10 years down the road, after 6 years of that homeschooling experience with our kids now in public school or having graduated, we were able to look back and to see the ways that our life was now different, and a different kind of life, a different context, and a different way of being in the world invited us to covenant together in new ways, in more informed ways, in ways that were a little less naive and a little more grounded in reality. And so to my wife, I am incredibly thankful for her suggestion that we renew our vows at 10 years, and her insistence that it was very important even when I couldn't see it. And I'm now deeply committed to doing it again and again in different seasons of our lives. Now, I know you all didn't come here today to hear a story about my marriage, but it works as an illustration in my head anyway about the importance of covenant to begin with, whether between two people or dozens or even hundreds of people, and the even greater importance of renewal of a covenant as we grow in our relationship with one another, as we come to learn new things, as the makeup of our gathered community shifts over time and we find ourselves in ever-changing contexts. UU Congregational Life staff writes the following about covenant. Covenant is the silk that joins congregations, communities, and individuals together in a web of interconnection. The practice of promising to walk together is the precious core of our creedless faith. Covenant is both a noun and a verb. It can be a written agreement among individual community members promising to behave in certain ways, and it can mean to engage in mutual promises with spirit, with other people, and with communities. Creating and agreeing to a covenant can be an extremely effective tool for building a foundation of trust. By creating shared expectations around the behaviors we want to cultivate, we come closer to creating the beloved community. So in the 2013 General Assembly in Louisville, there was a series of workshops on covenant entitled Radical Relationship, with subtitles like The Science of Covenant and The Theology of Covenant. My ears always perk up a bit when we talk about relationship or hospitality using the word radical. In one sense, I love it because I think it speaks to a depth of commitment that we don't often find in relationships outside of our own households today. In another way, though, I found it troubling, particularly in my experiences of its youth within churches, where a campaign to encourage or advertise radical welcome means that those who have been traditionally excluded in those churches might now be welcome. In which case, I always have to ask, what human being is so far outside the realm of the possibility of God's love or of a church's love that to welcome them would be radical? In my mind, that's nobody. So why are we patting ourselves on the back for welcoming those who should have been welcomed from the start? My struggle with the idea of radical relationship or radical inclusion pushed me to explore the multiple meanings of the word radical, which I find helpful. Some of those meanings include of or growing from the root of a plant, of relating to or constituting a linguistic root, of or relating to a mathematical root, of or relating to the origin or fundamental. Very different from the usual or traditional or extreme. And just for fun, the slang meaning is excellent or cool. So what if we are called to radical relationship as UUs, and more specifically as members and friends of this UU church? What kind of relationships would those be? They might be relationships rooted in the deep and rich traditions of Unitarian Universalism. Relationships rooted in the 7 principles that guide our life together, and rooted in a commitment to search together through sources known and unknown for truth that transforms. Maybe they are relationships that are fundamental to our way of being in the world, relationships that cause us to dig deep within ourselves to find the strength and source of our values, and to live those out in our interpersonal relationships and in the ways that we operate in the world. Perhaps radical relationships are those that are very different from the usual, not necessarily extreme, but not run of the mill also. Different in depth from the surface relationships that we have in other areas of our lives. Different in the place where we might say to one another, "How are you today?" And the expectation is not that the other person would say, "I'm fine," and carry on, but that they might actually share how they are today. And it might take a while, and it might call us to be with them in a ministry of presence that we didn't quite expect. I have seen in UU communities a depth of commitment to love and care for one another that is admirable, to be sure, and also uncommon in our increasingly polarized and disconnected world. And maybe radical relationships of the sort that you will find in this community and communities like it are also, as the slang definition would say, excellent and cool. So it occurs to me that if we are looking to develop radical relationships with each other and with the community that surrounds our congregation, that we have to be intentional about our way of being together. I'm thankful for the words of covenant penned by James Villa Blake in 1894 that are spoken in congregations all over on Sunday mornings. Love is the spirit of this church and service its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. And as great as that covenant is, I wonder what it looks like in practicality. What are the specific ways that we dwell together in peace? Guidelines for being together that offer both a path for success and a space for accountability. As we seek the truth in love, what are the processes that we use to communicate with each other that create space for each person to share their truth, and for others to lovingly question and dialogue with that truth in the formation of their own? And what are the ways that we'll help one another? Are there understandings about the ways that we will help that honor the needs and desires and voices of the one or ones being helped? Or will we help in such a way that we think we have the answers and we just respond by doing what we think is needed? A couple of weeks ago, our board president, Colleen, challenged us to look at our time apart as an opportunity to decide how we want to be different when we come back together. She didn't use these words, but to me, that sounds like a call to intentionally create radical relationships formed of common principles and purpose, lived out in shared values and action, and held together by the silky threads of covenant. Over the last year, we've heard from beloved members and friends, as well as visitors, some who returned and some who didn't, that there was more that needs to be done to make this sacred space safe. That there's more that we can do to create a space where all people feel welcome, and not just welcomed, but celebrated and included and valued. There is work to be done to cultivate a culture of curiosity and inclusion around different religious and non-religious beliefs, where the UU pagan, UU Christian, UU Buddhist, atheist, humanist, and agnostic, among others, dwell together in mutual respect and a common commitment to diversity of thought. There is work to be done to make this space not just safe, but safe and life-giving for our trans siblings and others in the LGBT community, for whom this may be a last shot at religious community. There is work to be done to root out There's that radical thing, to root out racism and white supremacy that exists in our system, structures, policies, and practices. There is work to be done. And the work of coming together to create covenant allows us to do that work in ways that honor every person who is a part of the process. I wonder if we can get to work now, having real, deep, honest conversations about the ways that we need to be together, to live into our highest aspirations as a community, and how we will encourage one another and hold one another accountable in the process. We've been ordering our services around the themes and some resources provided by Soul Matters. And I don't know who put the September through November themes in the order that they did, but I think they were brilliant. So after this month of imagining together what renewal might look like for us, we are invited into the theme of deep listening for October and healing for November. Friends, when there's work to be done, like I've just named, I can't think of a better process than to embark on a path of renewal that relies on deep listening and leads to healing. When we gather on Sunday mornings or in other times and places throughout the week and we light a chalice together, we demonstrate that we are entering the sacred space of covenanted relationship. May we all enter those spaces each time with a renewed commitment to the ideals of our UU faith and the practices of our UU community and the greatest aspirations of each and every one of us. Blessed be, and amen. Our interlude is Come Sing a Song with Me, performed by the virtual First UU Choir.